All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. That was said by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and while it sounds pretty inspiring, history proved that not every experiment led to scientific progress. From an ultra-secret Japanese military unit to the infamous CIA's mind control project. Today, we're ranking the most dangerous science experiments of all time. The CIA Mind Control Project, MKUltra. If you're familiar with the Manchurian Candidate or men who stare at goats, then you know. There was a time in the CIA's history when they did most unethical mind control experiments on humans. Well, the idea was pretty simple and deeply disturbing. The CIA wanted to find out whether a person's mind could be cracked open, rewired, and rebuilt into something useful for interrogation, espionage, or assassination during the Cold War. That ugly mission turned into Project MKUltra, a top-secret program that ran for years behind the mask of science. LSD was one of its favorite tools, but it did not stop there. Subjects were also pushed through hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroshock, sleep disruption, abuse, and psychological torment. The worst part was that many of the people being tested had no idea it was happening. Everyone, including prisoners, mental patients, soldiers, addicts, and even citizens, was used like lab rats. One of the darkest and lesser-known parts of MKUltra was how far it spread. We mean more than 80 institutions were tied to it, including hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. In Canada, the psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron carried out horrifying experiments on patients who had come in for ordinary mental health treatment. Some were placed in drug-induced comas for weeks and blasted with repeated recorded messages in an attempt to erase and reprogram their personalities. Then there was Frank Olson, a CIA scientist who was secretly dosed with LSD, spiraled into a mental collapse, and died after falling from a New York hotel window 9 days later. But in 1973, as pressure closed in, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered most of the records destroyed. Now, that alone tells you plenty. Even the agency eventually admitted the program was inhumane, illegal, and scientifically useless. MKUltra did not master the human mind to fight the Soviets. It exposed how far power will go when nobody is watching. Kellogg's study, The Ape and the Child. Back in 1931, Winthrop Kellogg and his wife tried to answer a mysterious question. Is it nurture or nature that makes us human? Well, to find out, they did something that still sounds unethical and unbelievable even now. They raised their 10-month-old son, Donald, alongside a 7.5-month-old chimpanzee named Gua, treating them almost exactly the same inside their home. And this was not some loose little observation study. It was constant. The two were fed together, dressed, measured, photographed, tested, and watched almost all day long. The Kelloggs wanted to see whether a chimp raised like a human kid could absorb human behavior, maybe language. At first, Gua actually seemed ahead. She walked upright sooner, followed commands better, recognized herself in the mirror first, then even showed more curiosity toward books and problem solving than Donald did. But then things started getting super disturbing. Instead of Gua becoming more human, Donald began slipping in the opposite direction. He started imitating her sounds, copying her behavior, and picking up habits no parent wants their child to learn from a chimp. Gua reportedly taught him to bite, peek under doors, and mimic strange animal-like responses. That was the moment the experiment stopped, after only 9 months. What makes this one especially unsettling is how casually it crossed a line. In 1965, Kellogg finally resigned from SRI, but it was a little too late. Donald died by suicide in 1973. Unit 731, the most terrible experiment. In 1925, the use of biological warfare was banned by the Geneva Protocol, but Japan refused to sign it. To its military leaders, that ban only proved one thing: these weapons worked. So, by the early 1930s, under the direction of General Shiro Ishii, the Imperial Japanese Army created a secret program in occupied Manchuria, publicly disguised as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Unit. But behind that name was Unit 731, one of the darkest facilities ever built. Inside this facility, humans were treated as disposable material. Victims, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, but also Russians and even some Americans, were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, and syphilis. Well, not to cure them, but to watch them die. Vivisections were performed without anesthesia because doctors believed pain would interfere with results. The organs were removed while people were still alive, just to observe the progression of disease in real time. Then came the field tests. Japanese aircraft dropped plague-infected fleas over Chinese villages. Wells were poisoned with cholera, and entire populations were unknowingly turned into live experiments. Inside the facility, an estimated 3,000 died. But when those biological attacks are included, the death toll rises toward 200,000 to 250,000. And then, somehow, it gets worse. After World War II, instead of facing justice, many of Unit 731's leaders were quietly granted immunity by the United States in exchange for their research data. For decades, the truth stayed buried, not because it was unknown, but because it was useful. Watson's Little Albert experiment. If you thought what they did with Donald was disturbing, then this story somehow gets even uglier. In 1920, American psychologist John B. Watson, alongside his graduate student Rosalie Rayner, set out to prove one of behaviorism's coldest ideas, that fear could be manufactured. And to prove it, they used a 9-month-old baby at Johns Hopkins University, known to the public only as Little Albert. At first, Albert showed no fear at all. He was calmly exposed to a white rat, along with other objects like furry animals and soft materials. Then Watson and Rayner began pairing the rat with a brutal sensory shock. Every time Albert reached for it, they struck a steel bar with a hammer behind his head, producing a terrifying crash. They repeated it enough times that Albert soon began crying the moment he saw the rat, even when no sound followed. Then the fear spread. He also became terrified of dogs, some rabbits, and even cotton balls. Well, anything fluffy like the rat. And here's the part that makes the whole thing rot from the inside. They never reversed the conditioning. For years, nobody even knew who Albert really was. But then, in 2010, many researchers concluded he was likely Douglas Merritt, a child who had serious neurological problems, never fully developed normally, and died in 1925 at just 6 years old. His mother, who was a wet nurse at the hospital, was reportedly paid just $1 for his involvement. Watson called it science. History calls it what it was: cruelty dressed in a lab coat. Rest in peace, Albert. The disturbing Nazi medical experiments. Now, Japan was not the only country turning human pain into so-called science. During World War II, the Nazi regime built an entire system of medical torture inside camps like Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. Under the control of Heinrich Himmler and carried out by camp doctors, prisoners were used as living test material for military survival, disease research, racial theory, and sterilization programs. Most of the victims were Jews, Romani people, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, and disabled people. None of them consented. Most never came out alive. Some of the experiments were almost impossible to hear about without feeling sick. At Dachau, prisoners were submerged in ice water or left naked in freezing conditions to see how long German pilots could survive hypothermia. Others were locked inside decompression chambers to simulate extreme altitude until their organs failed. And some were forced to drink only seawater to test dehydration limits. In other camps, doctors deliberately infected people with malaria, TB, typhus, and poisoned wounds just to test treatments or watch the body collapse. And the most infamous guy behind it was Dr. Joseph Mengele, the so-called Angel of Death. He arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1943 and became obsessed with twins, children, and eye color research. He sent blood, organs, and even preserved body parts to collaborators in Germany, injected substances into children's eyes, and carried out procedures that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with cruelty. After the war, these crimes helped lead to the doctor's trial in Nuremberg, and in 1947, the creation of the Nuremberg Code, when one of the first modern rules stating that voluntary consent in human experimentation is absolutely essential. Tuskegee Syphilis Study. Well, now, this experiment was one of the coldest betrayals ever carried out under the name of medicine. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service, working in Macon County, recruited hundreds of poor black men with promises of free treatment for what they called bad blood. That phrase sounded good enough, but it covered up something much uglier. Out of the 600 men involved, 399 had syphilis, and most of them were never told the truth. Instead of treating them, doctors decided to watch what the disease would do if it was left alone. That is what makes this one so viciously creepy. These men were not just ignored, they were actively misled for 40 years. They were given meals, medical checkups, and burial insurance to keep them in the study. Some were told they were receiving treatment when they were not. And when penicillin became the standard cure in 1945, the government still refused to help them. Even after public health programs began offering treatment in 1947, the men in Tuskegee were deliberately kept away from it. By the time a whistleblower named Peter Buxton exposed the study to the press in 1972, the damage was beyond repair. At least 128 men had died, wives had been infected, and children had been born with congenital syphilis. Then, as if that was not enough to poison the legacy of American medicine, the U.S. also ran a similar STD experiment in Guatemala between 1946 and 1948, infecting prisoners, psychiatric patients, and others without consent. Well, that was not research or science. That was pure betrayal. So, what do you think about it? Mustard gas tests. Now, we have a question for you. How do we know that mustard gas, or sulfur mustard, burns skin, blinds eyes, and can kill a person from the inside? Well, because the US government tested it on its own people. In the early 1940s, during World War II, the US military exposed around 60,000 American troops to chemical agents, including mustard gas and lewisite. These were not battlefield accidents. These were controlled experiments. Soldiers were placed inside sealed chambers while gas was released, or sent into gas-filled fields without protection. Many of them had no idea what they were being exposed to. What makes this even worse is how deliberate some of the selections were. The military did not choose test subjects randomly. Black soldiers were often selected to study how chemical burns appeared on darker skin. Japanese American and Puerto Rican troops were also used because researchers wanted to compare their reactions to what they called the normal baseline, which meant white soldiers. Now, that is not science, that is racism. And after all of that, many of these men were sworn to secrecy for decades, which meant a lot of them suffered in silence without proper treatment or recognition. So, what do you think about these science experiments? Well, drop your comments below. And as we always say, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.